Hello, welcome to this Grok talk on unifying ASP.NET and Windows Forms security. My name is Juval Lowy. I'm the Microsoft Regional Director for the Silicon Valley. I'm the principal of iDesign, and we specialize in .NET architecture consulting, and we do a fair amount of advanced .NET training. Let me show a little bit of what we do. Typically in enterprise environments, when you're using Windows-based applications, using Windows accounts for security is simply not good enough. For various reasons, the customer groups may not map to your actual accounts, or the logical roles users play in your application domain don't map to the accounts and the roles that Windows group are being set up. And even if they do, they may have different names, and the localization issue may get in the way. And so quite often, Windows Form applications do resort to using custom credential management. ASP.NET, on the other side, is hardly ever using Windows-based security, because in ASP.NET application, when you're actually having an internet-based application that is outward-facing, you use custom credentials. And so in .NET 2.0, ASP.NET 2.0 provides a built-in credential store that is stored in SQL Server using the best practices for security, sorting of passwords, mapping of users to roles, to application, and so on. It's a provider model so that you can actually add your own providers, such as if you want to go into LDAP or Active Directory. And it's got very tight integration with Visual Studio. Let me show you ASP.NET in action. I have here an ASP.NET 2.0 application. Here is a page. The page is a single button on it, and I want to add authentication for this application. I'm adding a login ASPX page. And if you go and look at the toolbar, you're going to see that there's a new setting, a new selection called login. And there's a login control. You drop it on the form. And in essence, there's also configuration pages. If you go to website ASP.NET configuration, takes a little bit. You click on security, and you can start adding users to your application. Let's add the user A with the password A. Actually, you need to have a strong password, so there it is. And email A@A, security question, and so on. Oh, password wasn't strong enough. You can even say this user is a member of the manager role in my application. And so on. And so what I'm doing here is I'm basically using the web pages to store entries in the credential data store that ASP.NET installs for you. And so let's run this application. Remember, all I did was I dropped this control on the form. I didn't do a single line of code beyond that. If you run the application, it will bring up the login page. You give the username, the password, and you log in. And so, zero code, good security infrastructure without developers having to worry about how to exactly set up things. And so this is clearly a significant productivity benefit. And what you want to have is you want to basically have the same benefit for Windows Form application. And so my goal was, let's take this good infrastructure, this provider model, and yet make sure that it's available for Windows Form application. That enables you not just to maintain the productivity benefits of ASP.NET, but also have the same application that uses different front ends, be it Windows Forms or ASP.NET, and yet you don't duplicating the security infrastructure. Here's the architecture. There's a login custom control, which is a normal Windows Form custom control that has username and password and a login button. It talks to an abstraction of a security provider. I'm calling it the iUser Manager. And that's where it's going to have the methods for authenticating the user and getting role information. There's also a custom security principal that the control is going to install. Once authentication takes place, it's going to attach it to the thread. The control has got full-blown integration with the Visual Studio Designer. You use the control to designate your role caching policy, your application name, and so on. Now, there's two concrete implementation of the iUser Manager interface. One of them is called the ASP.NET User Manager. That guy uses the ASP.NET providers directly. And so if you use that, you actually, on the client side, using the ASP.NET providers. To make this actually work, you're going to go to the to the Windows Form application, and you're going to add system.web entries to it, as if it's a web application, where you're going to specify your role manager policy, as well as your connections link to the database. Once you do that, this is a demo application that's going to use it. Here's a demo application that's going to use it. We have a login dialog that uses the custom control. In dotted line, this is the custom control. We have an application here, which is an MDI application. You click security, it's going to bring up the login dialog and use the control to log in against the ASP.NET providers. So now I'm actually logged in. You can see the status bar at the bottom, very similar to ASP.NET. I could even do certain operations, and it even checks role membership for me, because if you look at what the file new is about, file new is actually going to demand that whoever is using it is a member of the manager role. So this works actually very well, but it's not good enough. And the reason it's not good enough is because by doing so, you're actually using the ASP.NET providers directly, and those demand a very high degree of code access security permissions, because they were designed to use on the server. And so while you can grant most of those permissions to the Windows Form client yourself, that would make it run in higher credentials mode, and you don't want to have that in partial trust, because that actually disables partial trust. Here's a listing of the various permissions it actually requires. So the real solution to this is actually wrapping the ASP.NET providers using a web service. What the web service will do, it will keep the server-side security demands on the server. All you have to do is just grant the Windows Form application permission to call to the web service. So here's the revised architecture. We have a web service proxy class that goes over HTTP to a web service that interacts with the ASP.NET providers. The programming model, as far as the control and the application, remains exactly the same, because they all implement the same iUser Manager interface. But now you don't propagate the ASP.NET provider security demands to the client. Let's do this demo. Let's first look at the web service. Here's the web service. You can see a bunch of web methods. Oh, sorry, let's look at the iUser Manager interface first. This is a feature of ASP.NET 2.0 that you can actually expose interfaces to web services. Web methods on the methods that actually go and define the interface. And the actual implementation uses the membership providers directly. The client application is exactly the same as before. Here's the login dialog and the same application, except now the application configuration file doesn't contain the connections linked to the database. It just contains the address of the web service. Let's run this. You log in. Now I'm logging in against the web service. You can also do role membership verification and so on. And so once you're consuming a web service, there's a much reduced set of permissions that the application needs to support. This is really designed for a partial trust environment. You can even grant all of those permissions using the click once wizard of Visual Studio, where you specify the security permission, user interface permission, and so on. So to summarize, when using the ASP.NET providers, using a web service is much better suited for client environments where you anticipate the use of a partial trust deployment. And in general, whenever you select a custom credential management for your application, you really need a holistic approach that takes into account your application deployment, your security requirements, the code access security, your scalability, your extensibility, design time integration with the login control, and reuse scenarios. That's all. Thank you.